This story, I'm going to ask you to walk us through it. It hurts my stomach to even think about what this family has gone through. But we now know that the FBI has launched an investigation because the story is so absolutely horrific. Can you start by telling us and introducing to the audience Michael Corey Jenkins and what happened to him as he was apparently minding his own business, doing absolutely nothing illegal at all? And I have to say that to disabuse some of the trolls out there who like to assume we are in the midst of criminality, when the reality is the brother was minding his business. Talk to us about this story.
Yeah. So my colleague, Christina Carrega, who is our national criminal justice reporter at Capital B, came across this story about Michael Corey Jenkins, who is a 32-year-old Black man from the small town of Braxton, Mississippi. I think the population is like 200, 300 some odd folks. Who says while he was handcuffed, he was shot in the mouth by a deputy from the Rankin County Sheriff's Office on January 24th. And when, Christina got wind of this story, she reached out to Michael Jenkins' attorney, Malik Shabazz, and he told us there would be a press conference held in front of the hospital where Jenkins was receiving care in Jackson, Mississippi, which is the state's capital city, a predominantly Black city. Braxton is about 25 miles from Jackson. And so with me being from Mississippi and knowing, the lay of the land, we figured it would be best for me to take a trip down there, figure out what in the world is going on, and talk to, the family and others that I would come in contact with on the ground. And so like many rural areas, if you want to talk to folks, you got to go where they at. So, why or how did this happen? Michael went to hang out with his friend, Eddie Terrell Parker, at a friend's home on the evening of January 24th in Braxton, Mississippi. And 6 white sheriff deputies from Rankin County burst into the home, according to Eddie Parker and the attorney. According to Eddie, the police handcuffed him and also Michael. They searched the residence for drugs. Apparently, according to the attorney, there was not a search warrant. And when the officers didn't find anything, the deputies then beat them and tortured them. They poured all, sorts of liquids and beer all in their faces and just more horrendous acts for about 2 hours that night. And then at some point, an officer shot Michael Jenkins in the mouth. It's interesting.
I just want to pause you there.
Go ahead.
If I can, because I want to be clear. At the time that he was shot, as I understand it, he was already in handcuffs and restrained. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So 2-hour multi-hour torture session. No drugs are found as a result of this search warrant, or there was no search warrant, but in violation of there not being a search warrant, there were no drugs found anyway. These are 2 brothers chilling, hanging out at their house. You would go to your partner's house, I go to my partner's house, minding their business, and they are basically then. It feels to me like a scene out of South Africa. It feels to me out of a torture scene, out of full on apartheid, in a way that really is so violative of everything we understand about just basic decency and human rights, let alone the Constitution. And so again, 2 men doing absolutely nothing wrong, minding their business in the house, cops bust in, handcuff them, torture them, and then the brother is shot in the mouth. And fortunately, he was not killed. But let's talk about what happened in the aftermath of that shooting.
Yeah, so as a result of that shooting, Michael was hospitalized for weeks. He was in a medically induced coma. He had to undergo 2 surgeries, one where his tongue was surgically removed and his jaw was wired shut. So when Michael finally did, wake up, he could not speak. He could only write. And when I saw Michael, I'll get into this, he was able to say a few things, but barely. Like it was as if he was mumbling. I had to listen really intently just to try to make out what he was saying. But it's interesting. There was a press release that came out after the incident happened by the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations that claimed a subject pointed a gun at the deputies. But Eddie and Michael both said neither of them had a gun. So, that may be, I don't know if that's the reason why officers decided they wanted to shoot him in the mouth. But I thought it was interesting that they didn't identify the subject, but they did say, according to the officers, a subject had, a gun. So I thought that was
Do we know
interesting.
if
But
was there a gun recovered that wasn't already owned by the police?
we do not know. It has been very difficult to get any information from the Rankin County Sheriff's Office. Even when, my colleague Christina reached out to them, they said it's under investigation, so we cannot, talk about this. And of course, now we know the case has been handed over to the FBI. And so we probably won't know anything for a while.
I wonder if you think it might be useful for people to reach out to the Rankin County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office. I'm looking at their website right now, and if I were, in the audience, I'd want to know how to reach them, and I would want to know that the phone number is 601-825-1480. But that's only if I were interested in contacting the Rankin County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office, the body that had jurisdiction over this case, just to let them know how I feel. Maybe it won't do anything. The FBI has now taken over it. But if I were in the audience and I wanted a power work assignment, I would be willing to call 601-825-1480 to find out, hey, what happened with this case? Why is it that you have, we don't know, was there a gun found? I mean, obviously they're not going to give us this information, but I think they should know that the public wants to know what happened, because the brother, you said, had to have his tongue surgically removed in order to address the damage that was caused by the fact that he was shot in the face at close range while handcuffed by six police officers who had no search warrant and who found nothing even in violation of the absence of a search warrant. Would you think that might be helpful for people to know that the number is 601-825-1480?
Yeah, and I also know, I attended a press conference on February 15th, and folks were, of course, outraged. They were, rallying. They were even saying, we need to go to the Rankin County Sheriff's Office and show them how furious we are about what has happened and continues to happen in the state of Mississippi, right? And let them know we're serious. We want these officers to be held accountable. So there was definitely, that sentiment among folks on the ground, organizers, other family members of, victims of police brutality and violence. So I would think that folks for sure would want to find a channel to reach out to those folks. And we have also put in a public records request for, the police report for body cam footage. And of course, that's pending. We don't know when we will, receive that, but right. I'd hand delivered that public records request to make sure that they had it. But I want to, just talk a little bit about, when I saw, Michael Jenkins on February 15th, I attended that press conference I just mentioned, and I was granted access to his mother, his father, himself, and Eddie at their attorney's office in Jackson. And it was, difficult for me to report this story and looking, at Michael and hearing from, him and Eddie, because I have family members who have been victims of police brutality. And luckily they were not killed. Luckily, Eddie and Michael were not killed, but we know there is a history of folks encountering the police and it resulting in death. But I want to say, Michael was sitting there. He had bandages still on, his neck where he was shot. Every time he tried to speak, he would hold his neck. And you can just tell, physically how exhausting that was for him. And when I asked him, what do you want to come from this investigation? The one word I remember him saying is justice. He could say that, justice. And his mom, I'm sitting next to her, she's crying and she's recounting how traumatic the experience had been for her, just trying to confirm if it was her child that had been shot, just trying to visit her son in the hospital for hours the following day after the incident. She did not know anything.
My God.
And she, she told me, she said, after that first visit, I saw my son, and the next day, she saw sheriff's deputies surveilling the room. They would not let her into the room until she, paid for the bond for her son. Apparently, They had charged
What?
Michael. Yes, they charged Michael. According to the attorney, they charged Michael with aggravated assault and possession of a controlled substance. And so she had to pay, she said she had to pay the bond for that in order for the sheriff's deputies to be removed from that room so she could see her son. So imagine a mom, the father not knowing, first of all, if it was their son, finding out it was, trying to see their son and what his condition is, how, what's going on. And then to be told that if you want any information, go to Rankin County Sheriff's Office. If you want to see your son, you have to pay, this bond. So it was a lot. It was a lot for that family.
I mean, it's a lot for me to even hear. And even though I already invoked the imagery of South African apartheid, it feels like I'm listening to a scene out of a film like Bopa or Serafina. It feels like we're talking about something that absolutely should not happen. And yet the astonishing repetitiveness with which it does is absolutely heartbreaking to me. And I'm seeing in one of the chats, folks are saying, so Breonna Taylor wasn't an anomaly. We knew that, but to realize that it's happening in this way and that the families are being tortured in this way in the aftermath, it seems absolutely, it feels like something out of 1923. Instead of 2023. You're a native Mississippian. What are your thoughts as to where you think a case like this will land ultimately in light of what you know about your home state?
We've seen, even just, pointing to Rankin County, in 2021, they shot at least 5 people, I believe. And or at least 5 people have died, I should say, during an encounter with them, or immediately following an encounter with them. And there was one young man, Damian Cameron, who was allegedly beaten to death by the deputies in July of 2021 in front of his mother. And she was also present at that press conference. And apparently a grand jury didn't indict those officers. So we've seen cases where there hasn't been any justice in the way that the families would want in terms of even indicting the officers on those charges. So I would want to be hopeful. We've seen instances where officers have been charged, but it's far more where they're not. And I also want to bring up this. I know this isn't directly about this story, but it's related in the sense that right now, the Mississippi State Legislature, which is predominantly white and also Republican dominated, has advanced a bill that would, among a number of things, increase police presence across the capital city of Jackson. And we know that organizers, residents are saying we don't need more police, right? And the authors of this bill have said that it's supposed, increasing police presence is supposed to reduce crime. That's what they're saying of why they're introducing this bill. And so if the bill is passed, by increasing police presence, and I should also be specific, Capitol Police presence. So the Capitol Police oversees the jurisdiction of downtown Jackson. The bill would expand that to the entire city of Jackson. The Capitol Police serves under the Mississippi Department of Public Safety. And in previous cases, it has been difficult for residents to even get information about incidents that have happened with Capitol Police. They don't trust them. Just, similar to Rankin County, they have had a bit bad rep too when it comes to protecting and serving and making sure Black residents are safe in the city of Jackson. Just last year, the Capitol Police shot at least 4 people and killed at least one, Jalen Lewis, a 25-year-old. And so again, when you're seeing, just going back to protecting and serving, your officers are killing Black folks, and you want to expand police presence. It's just interesting, and I don't think it's a coincidence, as residents have said, and organizers, they don't think it's a coincidence that while law enforcement are doing what they're doing to Black folks, that white lawmakers are wanting to hire more officers. So yeah, and it's just a lot. It's just a lot.
It's hard for me to talk about these stories without a bit of depression, if I'm being perfectly honest, because it feels like we need to have a much better plan for how to respond to what is apparently business as usual. I've said often on this show that the folks we are in resistance to are using a playbook that they began writing in 1619. Based on your knowledge of what's happening in Mississippi and the depth of commitment that we see in terms of the leadership structure there, really operating and governing from a white power ethos, what is happening on the ground in terms of resistance? What does the resistance from Mississippians look like to these sorts of advances? You mentioned the Capitol Police expansion, the expansion of this judiciary that is going to be appointed by the all-white legislative all-white portion of the legislative body. What does resistance look like right now? And how can those of us outside of the state of Mississippi be a hell of a lot more effective in our support for the work that's being done there?
Yes. You know, for as long as I've known and known the, folks on the ground in Mississippi and being from Mississippi, folks have always been doing stuff. They've always been organizing. They've always, been trying to grow, the movement around, social justice and also, putting things into action and just around, before I get into, what they're doing now, I want to talk or mention something that a social justice organizer told me as I was reporting out the story about, the bill that is advancing to expand, police presence. And she said, we are embodying the energy of folks like Fannie Lou Hamer, who never gave up, who never quit. And so, we're just getting that from our ancestors so we can keep the fight going. And I think that speaks to how folks in Mississippi don't let what folks in power, white folks in power, to diminish what they've been trying to accomplish. So it looks like the resistance piece looks like continue to spread awareness around what's happening, right? Being loud as they can be. What Erika Bennett Scott, executive director of Mississippi Votes, has told me. We're going to be as loud as we can be. We can't be silent, right? So that's speaking inside of the Capitol, talking to lawmakers who are willing to listen and not. It's being vocal outside of the Capitol and holding, a rally or a press conference. It's organizing folks ahead of, the next election cycle. It's circulating petitions. It's documenting the experience of folks who have encountered police, for example. It's sharing the stories with news media, national outlets. It's forming coalitions, local and regionally and nationally. They're doing all the things, but I think one of the things that is really, really important to help grow, these movements that they have been a part of is resources. Some of these organizations have limited budgets, so they only have, a limited amount of reach. When it comes to trying to rally folks or just doing things to move the needle. So I would say if folks really want to help, it's sounding the alarm, continue to telling the stories, and also helping to give donations to folks like Mississippi Votes or the Poor People's campaign. All of these folks who have been doing the work for years.
It gives me a lot of joy to hear you invoke the name of the ancestors, and that is the response that we're seeing from folks on the ground. Because one of the things that I remember talking about a lot when Trump was being elected, because there was this weird conversation happening where some people were like, well, it might be good if Trump gets elected because then he'll destroy the country and then we will resist. And, there's that phrase, I think Marcus Garvey had said once, that when all else fails to organize the people, conditions will. And I used to really believe that. When conditions get bad enough, we will organize. And then I had an elder who told me, he was like, they might. He's like, I don't want to quibble with Marcus Garvey, but conditions might cause you to organize. Or if the conditions are so extreme, they might successfully beat resistance out of you. And it sounds like that the latter has not happened in the state of Mississippi. But one of my questions during that 2016 era was, are we as a Black community prepared for another migration of Black people who are finding their conditions so oppressive that they have to leave? Are we preparing for people to pour into our cities, our families, our friends, from people who can no longer stay in these highly, increasingly oppressive states? Are we preparing for them? Who's going to handle the transportation? Who's going to handle the housing needs, the healthcare needs of people who are no longer able to safely stay in their communities? And it is the conditions that you're talking about in Mississippi right now that we were seeing all throughout the South that helped to spur the last great migration. And we've got a whole bunch of people from up north going down south. And one of your colleagues, Adam Mahoney, has mentioned that, he's a little concerned about this because you got all these black folks leaving from the Northeast and these other black regions going into the South, which is also the environmental eye of the storm in terms of environmental racism. So there is so much happening here, and it feels like we are in desperate need of having a space where we can have our local plans connected to our national plans, but we need a different level of apparatus when it comes to helping out those who are in need. And so I'm glad that you were able to give us just a bit of some of the things that we can do. Mississippi Votes, we've had on this show before. We are reaching out to them because we want them back on the show. But y'all go to their website, support, send resources. Jackson Undivided.
Undivided. Yep.
Yes, send resources, go to their websites, give them the financial infusions that they need, because this takes work. And quite frankly, it's a hell of a lot cheaper for us to send resources to folks where they're at than it is going to be for us to come up with the resources necessary to handle what happens if our folks are forced en masse to leave these sites of increased and intensifying white nationalism. Allyah, I don't know if you have any final comments in terms of something that gives you a bit of hope. I don't want to end on a Pollyannish note. And, we do a moment of gratitude every morning so that when we have a heavy story like this one, I'm like, all right, just refer back to the joy you had in your moment of gratitude to help carry you through the day. But is there anything about what you're seeing in terms of rural Black America that gives you a bit of optimism that this is going to end better than it is now?
It's just the people who are on the ground making the moves, the movers and shakers that see, and envision this better world for us. And it's talking to them and hearing their stories, and me amplifying these racial disparities and injustices, but also highlighting these folks who are doing the work. I think that is what gives me the most hope, just knowing and seeing the work that folks are doing on the ground.
And we'll have to leave it there for now. Allyah, I am so grateful for you and appreciative of the work that you're doing. Thank you for elevating these stories. Y'all, this is why I ride for Capital B News. Like, y'all know, and there's a couple of y'all outlets right now. It's Capital B, Word in Black. There's a couple of y'all. I'm like, come on, y'all. We gonna support, because we need this information so desperately, and we need it in a way that isn't compromised. So I appreciate your journalistic integrity. Thank you for being with us today and for reminding us that we can call 601-825-1480 to add. Oh no, we can give her the applause, but we're gonna add that public pressure as well. It's been a real pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me.